First, what I would like to see is creative problem solving. A couple of things that are definitely going to happen. Number one is the improvement of AI. Cost of compliance usually in the large organizations is very easy to address because large organizations want to generally be compliant. They want to make sure that they're proactive in nature. They want to retain that customer trust. They want to make sure that their brand is visible and they're not doing anything unethical. Let's not just look at how technology is disruptive. Let's see what kind of innovations can come. Let's see how creatively we're able to solve problems and how we're able to free up the human time to actually do something that is more creative, that is more productive, not just the mundane jobs.
Hello and welcome to Cyber Weekly. So, in this episode, we'll be talking to Satyajit. I won't try to read the other name because I've not yet learned how to pronounce it. But welcome, Satyajit.
Thank you, dear.
So now, for starters, we'll just dive deep into it. So, could you walk us through your journey and what makes you suitable to tackle this topic of compliance deep dive?
Okay, so let me start with my first job. My first job was actually in the card industry before the PCI DSS actually came out. So I was working for a credit. It's called HO. It was called HOVAR credit. So what we used to do was collections, card collections. So if there's anyone who made a card or used a card and did not pay back, so we were the collection agency. So it was the first job that actually got me interested in compliance, because you see, there was some sort of a protection that would then come to the payment card aggregator, and that was the collections. So that was my first step into this particular domain of compliance. And from there, I moved to telco, and in telecom, I was handling postpay. So of course, there was that element of retaining customer trust, making sure that customers are able to understand what their rights are. You're able to identify a customer before you actually start talking to him, disclosing information, etc., etc. So there was that element of privacy compliance that actually came about, and this was in the earlys. And then later on, I moved to Maps, Google Maps, and it was very interesting to see how you can then use the information that was generated by a device that is held by a customer to actually tag, locate, and identify his locations, his proximity, etc., etc. So it was an eye opener, and we were able to see how geo restrictions can work, how people are able to interact with each other on the map, which is basically this is the location, this is where I am, street view, etc. And after that, I moved into the advisory world, and after that is when I realized the audit side of things, the advisory side of things, how money markets work, how regulations, how governance plays an important part in running a business. And closer to home, when I actually got back to Nairobi, I realized that there's quite a bit of a journey for us in East Africa to embark on. And that was very interesting because you see, the thought was always that the world is one and everyone is playing catch up with the other, but didn't really realize that in Africa we were slightly behind. And that actually, showed us the way people were working in the West, people were working in the Far East, in the Southeast Asian side, and how we were in Africa. So, bringing up all of that into context, it actually showed where we were in terms of our compliance journey, as from a regulator standpoint, from a business standpoint, from a consumer awareness standpoint. So, all these things put together actually made me realize that, you see, there's quite a bit of knowledge sharing. Number one, there's quite a bit of catching up to do. To compete in the 21st century, you need to have that edge. And that edge doesn't necessarily come with the kind of technology that you're selling or the kind of products that you're selling, but the kind of reputation that you build, what kind of brand you have, what kind of customer value are you adding, and that leads to an organization that is ethical. And when you're talking about ethics, when you're talking about how compliant you are, it all boils down to what kind of frameworks you have, what kind of um, insights you can provide to a customer about his safety, about his privacy, about what kind of processes are there to enable transparency on how his data is being used. What kind of value can a customer get from your brand, not just the product. And that all boils down to how the customer is associated with you, and that brings a very interesting insight. So all this has been something that has driven that edge of that thought of compliance in me. And I've always wondered how else it's not just the dotting of the i's and crossing the t's, but also what is it that actually helps organizations be more practical. Yeah, because that is where I think there's a lot of advice that needs to go in. There's a lot of thinking, out of the box thinking, that needs to come in, and looking for solutions that or don't necessarily cross over onto the compliance neglection side. So yeah, I think throughout my career so far, I have looked at compliance as one of the key components for a successful business. And I think it has been that insight around governance that has really helped me advise clients.
Sure. Thank you, Sacha, for that. And you've had such an illustrious career. For context, could you please tell us your background in education and how you've achieved all the incredible milestones for anyone looking up to you?
Okay, you see, I'm a graduate, and then I think for me, the formal education, has not really been a Kickstarter, to be honest. What has actually added on to my career is professional certifications. The difference is that, you see, if you're going to go get formal education, you're an academic. An academic usually is capable of reading, memorizing, analyzing, retaining stuff. But when you're a professional is someone who knows what to do and to what level is he supposed to be involved. So for me, it has always been about professional education, which is why I started my journey in ACCA. I did CISA, I did CDPSC. I'm working with EC Council on my CH journey, CH master journey, and there are quite a number of other certifications that I'm also pursuing, like the OSCP. So it's a constant learning curve. It's not something that is going to stop at any given point. And one key thing that has actually helped me throughout the journey is it's how much skill you acquire. It's not how many degrees you have. It's not how many professional certifications you have. It's basically, what is the relevant professional certification that you need, and how relevant are you to the industry with the skills that you possess. So skill is number one on the list. So the more you develop your skill, the more you are useful in the industry. The lesser you are inclined towards improving yourself, developing new skill sets, the more redundant you become over time. So it's always upskilling that is needed. It's not that what I have done in the past. Past is something that no one wants to really look at. It's what is in the future that you're learning towards, and that is what will make a huge difference.
Sure. And you've mentioned that compliance is key in business success. What does compliance really mean in today's business world, and what does it take for businesses to achieve it?
Okay, there are a number of elements here. You see, for a business to be quote unquote compliant, it's not 100% compliance requirement. Okay, not everyone is able to achieve that 100% compliance, to be honest. So there's something around risk, compliance risk, that an organization needs to understand, and it's a journey. It's not something that you directly go and say, okay, fine, I have the law that says A, B, C, D, E items. and I'm supposed to do 1, 2, 3, 4 things for me to get compliant, right? That's the roadmap, correct? But practically speaking, in order for you to achieve that level of compliance, what can you do is the real question that needs to be asked in a boardroom. So, which means we're starting at governance. Okay. So, of course, you need to ensure that there is some level of balance that comes in from innovation or from whatever your organization is embarking on, the mission of the organization, and what level of financial capability does the organization have at a very high level. Okay. From there, you go down to who are the people responsible for this overall journey and what kind of skills do they possess. Because remember, when you're starting on a compliance journey, it's not how quick you can get towards compliance. It is how well can you achieve the status of compliance, the reasonableness that you have, making sure that you're addressing specific risks. And every organization has their own risk portfolio. Some organization, the reason why I started with governance is governance risks also have a direct impact on compliance to an organization. Okay, let's talk about use of third parties. You've seen that almost all organizations use third-party service providers. Okay, now let's talk about data privacy. Okay, when you're saying data privacy and you're using a third party, is there any reference or is there any way you can identify if the third party is using automated decision making on behalf of this data subject? You can't. Is there a way you can say that the third party that is involved in helping your organization does not use AI? You can't. Yeah. So how is it that you're going to then determine if, or let's say if there's a situation, right? Let's say that you feel that ChatGPT has retained some sort of history about you, and you're able to get onto the internet and find that, and you're surprised to know that there's a lot of information about you out there, but you've never given this information. So the question becomes, who did I share this information with? And that is where the ethical governance aspect comes in when you're trying to look at governance and when you're trying to see how compliant an organization is in a simple aspect. Now, the next thing that an organization is supposed to be aware of is around vendor management. There's a lot of thought that, okay, yeah, I'm using international companies like Microsoft, like Google. But question is, yes, you are using these organizations as your service provider. They don't really look at risks that come with these kind of organizations. So as much as, yes, these are exceptions, there's no way you can bring a representative of Google to come and sign on a sheet or on a document to say, no, you need to abide by our policy because you are my service provider. That doesn't make sense. But these are exceptions. Have these exceptions been considered from a risk element? No. So these are examples of where you see outliers when you're looking at compliance in an organization. So these are exceptions where you need to take note to say, okay, fine, I have looked at certain risks. I have looked at certain specific risks pertaining to, for example, third parties that we've just spoken about. And the first element of this entire journey is actually identifying your risks that matter towards compliance. So in these situations, are you saying that these organizations are compliant? We don't know. They may be compliant or they may be largely compliant to specific laws, but they're not specifically required to comply to the land, the laws of the land, right? So I think we've seen in the recent past there has been some ruling by PDPO against some of these large companies. So what does that mean to organizations that have been using these companies? Are they compliant? No. But there is that level of reasonableness that needs to come in, and that's what an organization needs to drive towards. So as much as you want to do your roadmap, as much as you want to understand what kind of risks there are some underlying risks that are associated with third parties that no one can neglect. That's number one. Number two, we spoke about people. Now, when I look at incident response and handling, there are certain requirements that the law would say that, let's say if there is an incident that you need to notify a data subject. Let's talk about data privacy because that's something that is new in the market. Question is, what are the time frames, right? In Kenya, you've got 72 hours, up to 72 hours after identifying the breach. In Uganda, I'm not too sure. But again, the question becomes, is the regulator actually giving you a practical, achievable target for you to be compliant? Because sometimes some of these incidents may go undetected for a very long time. Let's say there's an APT, right? So there's an advanced persistent threat attack. Like, someone's been in the system for a very long time, they've been very quiet. How do you then ensure that particular threat has been identified? You can't. So there are certain elements that then come about that are human in nature. And these are largely because of not just training, because you see some of the people prefer to look at it as, oh, we need to have trained people, continuously. But that's not all of it. Training is one angle. That is you trying to help an organization's stakeholders, internal stakeholders. But what about those internal stakeholders who are not going to necessarily get the training needed? I'll give you an example. Let's say there's someone who's clicked on a link that relates to an R&R or rewards and recognition ceremony of an office, and that's a phishing link. You wouldn't know. Yeah. No matter what level of compliance, but that would be a first level compromise right there. You've done cybersecurity trainings, you've done all of this, but at the end of the day, you still have a challenge there. And now, does this person report it to IT? If there's a high likelihood of him not reporting, then you can't detect the incident. If you can't detect the incident, the incident has not been detected completely. It can be ignored, it can never be tracked. Then does that mean that you have not met the regulatory compliance? There's a detection error, so there's definitely a challenge there. You didn't even know it happened. So how can you give the regulator a concrete information? So there are these things that then come about from a human perspective. Then third is operational. As much as you want to look at compliance, there are too many moving parts. So there's the compliance that the taxman would want you to have. There's the compliance that you would want to have as someone who's independent in the organization, like maybe to a governance framework, to your internal controls framework, etc. Then there is a regulator, if you're working in a regulated industry, like maybe if you're a bank, financial institution. Maintaining all these things would then start with risk. But then at the end of the day, would you then say that because of new improvements to the ecosystem that you're working with, new regulations that are coming about, you will still retain to the old way of working? No. So there will be changes in the operations. When changes in operations come about, will you still stick to the old policies? No, you will not. So generally, it's a journey. You'll need to then start transforming your entire organization from people, processes, technology, and then you bring about that entire change. And change management, as we all know, it is not easy. So in that period of change management, would you call yourself compliant? No. So which is why the route to compliance is one that takes careful planning, choreography of events, and reasonableness in how you're going to abide to a particular set of policies, procedures, or the regulation at large. To answer your question simply, it's a journey. It takes time, and it's not a one-stop shop for everyone.
That's interesting. So now when it comes to a big organization or small, how do you effectively sell compliance to the business side and demonstrate its value beyond avoiding fines?
Okay. Now, when you look at businesses, whether be it big or be it small, it's always about the return on investment. Okay. Most businesses, like if you're looking at small businesses, their first rule is what? Maximize shareholder wealth, isn't it?
Yeah.
So the question is, if let's say there is a particular cost to compliance, what kind of return is that particular organization getting. So you cannot go to a manufacturing entity and say, listen, I'm going to get you ISO 27001 compliant, when they actually need ISO 9001 compliance, because they're doing product, they're manufacturing things. So there's some sort of quality management that is needed, isn't it? So
Yeah.
the relevancy of the cost of compliance is what matters, number one. Number two, when we're looking at the overall picture, the larger picture is what most organizations miss out on, because there are elements of digital trust that come in when you're using information systems to enable your organization. Okay. Now, I'm sure that almost all businesses, if not all, are using information technology in one way or the other. And they do collect your information. They do collect and store your data subject information for a very long time. Now, questions around what exactly would matter are now decisions that an organization will need to take. So, when we're talking about specific items to do with small organizations versus big organizations, large organizations have complex structures. They have a hierarchy. They have some sort of processes in place. They have some sort of a way. They have some sort of policies. They have a governance framework, etc. When you come to MSMEs and SMEs, these are largely family-owned businesses. These are people who own the business. They're probably the directors. They're probably the CEOs, etc. In these two people, compliance, number one, is going to be extremely difficult. Number two, there has to be a return on investment. Number three, there has to be a value proposition. So cost of compliance usually in the large organizations is very easy to address, because large organizations want to generally be compliant. They want to make sure that they're proactive in nature. They want to retain that customer trust. They want to make sure that their brand is visible and they're not doing anything unethical. So there's already specific functions who are able to identify these requirements. They're already working on getting themselves towards that compliance path, and they're working towards ensuring that the organization is reasonably compliant towards whatever regulations affect them. Now, when you come to the MSMEs and the SMEs, the first question that comes into the owner's mind is, what is the implication? And if you tell them that the implication is a fine, believe me, the first question they ask you is, how many people have been fined in the market? So they're talking about enforcements. They're asking you about repercussions and the level of enforcement. Now, we cannot just say that, okay, this is going to attract a fine of this, but making them realize that, you see, what you're doing is actually going to be a long game. You're actually going to assist your organization in building a reputable brand, in building customer trust, in bringing about that entire um, concept of brand, basically a customer being related to a brand or being linked to a brand and be happy about it. All those now are the soft side of things that are going to be looking at the intangible nature of that value. Okay, it equates to goodwill in a way, but that's the way that an organization is supposed to then understand when it comes to MSMEs. Yeah. So I hope I've answered your question relatively well.
Yeah, it varies basing on industry and also basing on the needs of the organization.
Exactly. But the underlying factor is still the same, that there's a reasonableness to compliance, and it's not one size that fits all. So how the stakeholder looks at it is basically going to be the selling point. If you're going to sell fear, that oh, you're going to lose out on A, B, C, D, E, then that's going to be one point. But if you talk about market share, then anyone in the board will listen, irrespective of the size.
It's interesting when it's a family business, when the people on the board are the same people in the operational level. So
Yeah. No, we've seen a couple of family-owned businesses. In fact, when we talk about the level of compliance, when we talk about what they're supposed to do, the first question is, if it is not tax related, if it is not mandatory, then it can wait.
Always.
But then when they see that there is a repercussion clearly and it is financial in nature, then the action has to be taken immediately.
Yes.
That's the family-owned side of things.
That's true. And also when the regulator demands it, then people will act. Otherwise, it just be a suggestion.
Yeah, and you know, the interesting part is when the regulator asks for it, they do not want a full compliance. They will want a consultant to come, find out the current state, just get them towards a point where the regulator's questions have been answered, and that's it. Nothing more, nothing less. So that becomes a bigger challenge, because now, as a consultant, if you're looking at it as a professional, the biggest challenge that you will have is you're not allowed to do your work in the independence that you need.
Yeah, because there's a goal in mind.
Exactly. It becomes difficult for you to address scope areas.
They're like, okay, we need to be ISO 27001 certified. What do we need to do? So minimum level. Don't do too much.
Yeah.
But anyway. Yeah. So which compliance frameworks are the most relevant today? Is it ISO? Is it ISO 27001, NIST, GDPR? Which ones are those that you can't do without?
You see, there are two sides of things. Okay, there are those that are required for you to do business. Okay, like for instance, back in 2018, when the EU GDPR came out, if there was any business that you were working with that was based in Europe, or if there was any business that was associated with the EU national, they would have preferred working with you if you were EU GDPR compliant. So there's that element of the business requirement. Then second is, after the new regulations around data privacy has come about, a lot of large organizations prefer working with organizations that are compliant towards the local act. Okay. Then you have some where let's not talk about regulation. Now let's talk about some other ones. Like for instance, if an organization has a specific product that they're launching, okay, let's talk about e-wallet service or any other electronically available service that will reduce the time to market for anyone in the supply chain. Then the first question is, what is the relevant framework that you need to adopt? And in most cases, what we have seen is ISO 27001 focuses only on specific areas. GDPR focuses on specific areas toward privacy and protection. But you need something that is larger than that, something like COVID 2019. Right? So when you're talking about COVID 2019, you're talking about an overarching governance framework that plugs into every place, that is capable of looking at so many different areas of a business. And that can be suitable for you if a large organization, if you're like a large organization, a multinational, and you're able to now geographically understand what kind of risks are there, and then you bring everything together from a governance standpoint. But the most basic, in my opinion, is the ISF framework by NIST, because that looks at specific areas in 6 different areas, in 6 different broad categories. Okay. And it is a very interesting framework in that it's not industry specific. It can help an organization in the service as well as it can help organizations that are in manufacturing. So it's a framework that can be customized, that can be fine-tuned to actually cut across any other framework like ISO 27001, like the GDPR, like data protection, the PDPO's Data Protection Act. It can cut across regulation, that can cut across any other framework that may be needed in terms of compliance. So bringing all of that together, you're looking at governance, from governance all the way through to communication, which is basically what a framework should talk about, because you're talking about identification, you're talking about protection, you're talking about detection, you're talking about response, and you're talking about how you're going to basically wrap up everything and even have it documented and monitored. So a framework that is comprehensive, that can bring about value to the organization and help the organization's compliance teams or risk teams monitor risks and monitor the state of compliance is what a framework should ideally do. And once you have a framework like that in place, if you look at the value that the organization gets, it's very easy. For one, understanding their controls becomes easy because they're mapped to a specific requirement and the standard. So auditing those will be even easier. Second, coming up with policies, procedures, operational procedures, standard operating procedures. It's much easier because you know what exactly that standard needs you to do. You need to map it to what your processes are. You need to now identify specific processes. You see how those can be mapped onto this particular framework. What are the requirements of the framework? And you can proceed in that direction to actually map and neatly, close out whatever you need to close out to a large extent. And that becomes easier even from a monitoring perspective and an audit perspective. So keeping a track of risks, keeping a track of your audit, keeping a track of your level of internal controls is what a framework should ideally help in looking at things. So, if I'm sitting at the board level, have this framework in place, there will be specific dashboards that I expect, and there will be specific areas that I would like to look into. So let's say if there's a new regulation that comes in, and I've largely looked at what is needed on the other side, it becomes easier for me to understand where I need to make changes or what kind of investments I need to bring on board. But in an event where I have frameworks that are not talking to each other, there's one silo here, there's one silo here, there's one silo here. What happens is keeping a track of all those silos then becomes a challenge. The cost of compliance then goes up. Yeah. So uniformity, working without a silo, a framework that can help bring in that harmony is what is ideal for any organization. So from a cybersecurity perspective, I've mentioned ISF. There are other industry standards like the 9001 that talks about quality management that can be plugged into this. But the overarching framework that we're talking about is a governance framework that can basically incorporate any standard and help assist in compliance to any regulation is what an organization ideally should need.
Yeah, that is interesting. But if you're looking at the next 3 to 5 years, which piece of regulation or compliance trend do you predict will be the most disruptive or require the biggest overhaul in company operations?
Okay, now let me tell you something interesting that I've noted so far. There's a race to AI. Everyone's talking about AI. AI is like now one of those words, back in the early 2018s or 2019s, it was cloud. It's a buzzword, right? Guys love it. So whenever you're talking about AI, they're always ready to listen. And they always have this imaginary feeling that it's going to disrupt. It's going to do this. It's going to do that. And there are scenarios, there are real world examples where this has happened, no doubt. Now, here is the question that needs to be answered, and that's not the question that has been asked. Okay, you're talking about something that has, well, in across the globe, there has been quite a bit of discussion around how to regulate it. So let's talk about cryptocurrency. Is there any country in the world that has actually tried to regulate cryptocurrency effectively? No. They have tried. Certain frameworks that are coming into place. There's still quite a bit of a journey. I don't think there are any central banks who have actually successfully done anything in regulating cryptocurrency or traders. But in order for you to get towards the crypto, there has to be a tradable currency, like the dollar. Okay. Now, when you're looking at the dollar and you're looking at offshore investments, Capital Markets Authority comes in and then helps you to see if you're licensed to actually do what you can do, etc., etc. Okay. So this is one piece of regulation that comes in from one particular regulator when you're looking at forex trading online. Number one. Number two, you've got data privacy. You've got cross-border data transfer. Okay. That's the second most interesting topic. But when you put these two together and then you're introducing AI, is there any specific regulation around AI for any country? Nothing that has been successful, isn't it? We're still trying to understand quite a bit of what, well, the European Union has thought about something to do with AI. But again, largely, there is no country in Africa that has actually tried and regulated AI successfully. Because the regulation is, regulators usually try to play catch up. There's a problem that has come in, there's a new innovation that has come in that's causing some level of disruption to the market, or that it's doing something in the market. So the regulator is now alerted, oh, okay, fine, now I need to find what this thing does and how can I then protect people. That's where regulations come from. Now, when you're talking about all these, you've got the Cyber Crimes Act that has come in, you've got the Personal Data Protection Act that has come in, we're talking about the cyber assets that has come in. There are a number of things that are moving, but the underlying thing is there is nothing that is actually addressing the problem. Everyone is trying to attack it from its own, from their own perspective. Okay, that is today's current scenario. The rate at which things are moving in 2021, I'll give you an example. In 2021, we were not too keen about AI. But does that mean it didn't exist? It did exist. Instagram was still there. Netflix was still there. So all these are platforms, isn't it? But what is the baseline for it? Is AI, right? You, all those who have been using Apple devices, Google devices, you still had Google as your personal assistant. You still had Apple as your personal assistant. There was information that was being collected across, isn't it? There were prompts. There was some sort of automated decision making that was being made. But has that really been addressed from that point onwards? No. In fact, what happened was during COVID, a lot of these technology companies made sure that they were able to come up with innovative ways to then protect the customer. Like, for instance, Apple had that feature where if you're in a close proximity of someone who had COVID, it would alert you. There were certain innovations that came in that actually helped. But now, if you're looking at the regulatory perspective, was that something that needed to be regulated? Thinking about it retrospectively, because remember, now it's using your personal data and is now doing something that is automated data processing. And believe it or not, there was already a regulation in the country, isn't it? But
Yes.
did anything happen to negatively impact that particular feature? What are we trying to say? Regulators are playing catch up, number one. Number two, in order for you to actually come up with some sort of a regulatory framework or a compliance framework, the most interesting part is you need to first understand the level of um, disruption or innovation that is there. And three, what are the benefits versus what are the impact? And in order for you to get to all those three, there has to be a very deep understanding about, let's say, the technology, the process, the use case, and the objective. And if none of this has been aligned, and if none of this has actually, come out as something that is potentially risky, that can have an impact on the individual, then is there a need for it to be regulated? We don't know that yet, because there's not been enough research on it to actually deep dive and say that this is potentially what can happen. But let's talk about the flip side. You've got deep fakes. You've got a lot of AI generated videos that are not real. You've got quite a number of unnecessary things that are now coming about because of AI. So there is an impact there, isn't it, to how people are being handled. So is there a need for regulation to come in now? Yes. What is the regulation supposed to do? It's supposed to protect the human interest and supposed to protect the human identity, right? So if there is that element of non-repudiation that comes in perfectly, then there is a way that a regulator can help. There is a way that a particular process can be developed to actually handle these kind of issues. So the way where we are right now in 2025, there are a lot of moving pieces. So in the next 5 years, there are a couple of things that are definitely going to happen. Number one is the improvement of AI. Okay, there's going to be a lot of improvement. There's going to be a lot of changes towards how AI is going to look at things. Second, you're going to look at a lot of robotic process automation that's going to come. So you're talking about a lot of automations within the organizations. You're talking about a lot of automated data driven decisions that are going to be made. Talking about reduced human need in most situations. Like I've seen factories that are completely working on operational technology where 5 years ago you didn't have them in Africa. But you can see that paradigm shift. You can see that Africa is moving towards gearing up itself for the future. So with a lot of these moving parts, regulations will also change. And the most predominant ones are going to go back to the basics. One is healthcare. You cannot take that away from any individual. That's very important, right? Two is identity management. So anything around any regulation around identity management will definitely be improved, will definitely be there to make um, the world a safer place, the internet a safer place. Three, regulations around AI. Those ones will definitely come about. Four, regulations around cryptocurrency. Because at the end of the day, the markets need to still be stable. There still needs to be existence of currency and a fair market size and the economy. Okay. And lastly, what is going to be the most important is a regulation around how to protect consumers and allow unethical practices and whistleblowing. Because these five are fundamentally going to protect the organization. And by protecting the organization, they're protecting the people. By protecting the people, they're protecting the overall society. Now, that said and done, we look at the emerging side of things. There's a lot of things to do with ESG, right? Now, ESG is talking about sustainability. It's talking about climate change. It's talking about circular economy. Okay. If you look at it retrospectively, a lot of us, when we were growing up, used to have one bottle that we used to take every day to school or wherever, and that was the bottle we would fill to drink water. Then came the plastic bottles, drink, throw. Right? I don't think a lot of us would use it for more than 3 or 4 times because then the structural integrity would go down. Then in 20s, I think in right about 2017, 2018, you saw the emergence of glass bottles come back again. People were now trying to circularize it, trying to reduce cost, trying to make sure that things are again going back to a sustainable way of living, isn't it? So sustainable life cycle to actually retain the world or keep the world preserved for a longer time is again another regulation that's going to come in. Because as much as we're talking about crypto, as much as we're talking about blockchain, there's the energy factor that comes in to actually generate or to mine those currencies, to run those technologies, which is not easy. They're very expensive. So it leaves a carbon footprint, right? So you need more energy, you need more, it leaves a bigger carbon footprint. Try to reduce the carbon footprint, you're trying to reduce the energy consumption, you're trying to now make sure that it's much more sustainable. So that is another regulatory area that you can see emerge in the next 5 years.
Thank you for that, Satyajit. We are fast spent on time. I would like to know your parting shots, and you could also please add a caveat of what you would expect to see in a young person growing up and wants to follow the same footsteps as you.
Okay. I think I'll start with your second question first. What I would like to see in a young person. First, what I would like to see is creative problem solving. Because what I want to see in today's world is, I want to see someone who's capable of driving the change, being a torch bearer. Not just for the organization, not just for his family, not just for his peers, but also make a change, make an impact to the world. Someone who has that kind of out of the box thinking to look at problems at the face of it, understand the depth of the problem. And of course, I'm not expecting a young man or a young woman of 20 years to actually do this because It takes time, it takes experience, but constant learning, creative thinking, complex problem solving skills, that is what is very, very essential. And developing those will help develop a young nation, will help develop a young population capable of leading change. And I think that is what is needed in the upcoming future. My parting shot would be, let's not look at a lot of buzzwords. Let's understand how the world is changing, and let's not wait for regulators to enforce things. Let's be proactive. Let's try to make and build a sustainable world. Let's not just look at how technology is disruptive. Let's see what kind of innovations can come. Let's see how creatively we're able to solve problems, and how we're able to free up the human time to actually do something that is more creative, that is more productive, not just the mundane jobs. Yeah. So as much as we're trying to focus towards compliance, as much as we're trying to focus towards having regulations, let's think out of the box. Let's make sure that we're not just talking about what is there. Let's create new avenues to solve what is not being solved right now, and let us help build a society that the regulator is a part of, and let's help the regulator become better. So that's through public private partnerships. Let's be thought leaders. So it all starts with the person and how that person wants to look at the world. So compliance is also one of the areas, but it's not the only area, right? So if it's as simple as this. If you're, how we've seen in a lot of movies, for every trick that has been put in, there's a twist that comes in, and there's a solution that comes at the end of it. So if we're finding a problem, let's look at the ways that you can address that problem successfully. And that is where I think there'll be a lot of effort that will be needed by the future generations.
Sure.
Thank you, Satyajit.
Thank you, Angela.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sajad. I like that you say that we need to free up time, so that we can do creative processes other than just the 9 to 5.
Exactly. Because otherwise, I mean, I've asked so many people, what do you like doing? They actually have to think for that. But if I ask them,
Because
what do
all
you
they
do?
know is going to work. Yeah.
Exactly. Going to work, going back home and meeting friends in the evening.
Yeah.
But if you ask them, what do you like to do? They
I
take
like
a
to
bit of time to
paint.
process.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you have a mundane task that can be automated or that can be effectively closed out, and you can save maybe 8 hours in a week, that's a whole day given back to you.
Yeah.
That's
Instead of a
true.
5-day week, you have a 4-day week. So use technology in the right direction and see how we can change things.
Yeah.
That's true.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
Seta.
Yes. Okay. Have a good
Thank
one.
you for having me on your show.
You're welcome.
Thank you for coming on the podcast.
All right. Goodbye.
Bye.